Hey everybody, Mr. Price here. I'm just going to be modeling how to complete our observational journaling assignment we're going to be doing weekly for the rest of the year. So what I'm going to be doing is tracking the growth of this red flowering currant here. So maybe I'll back up and give you a little bigger view. So this is a unique plant. It's in our hedgerow, and it was one of our first red flowering currants to flower. So there are its beautiful pink flowers. They've been getting pollinated by the bees and some other things, so they're starting to close up a little bit, which is kind of neat. So I'm going to be sort of tracking this plant's growth, coming back weekly, and completing my observational journaling form so I can sort of get some quantitative and qualitative data as to how things are growing and changing over time. So let's go ahead and get going. So the first thing we're going to want to start with here is collecting sort of our baseline data, which we see down here. So we want to make sure we're capturing the date, the place, the weather and temperature generally, and the time. So I'm just going to start up at the top here. I'm going to give a name for my observation. So there's my baseline data, all down there. I apologize for my extra bad handwriting. I'm kind of writing over the camera, so it's making it a little bit tricky to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is start with just a sketch and description of what I am seeing. So it's important to draw because it actually helps our memory. It helps us sort of define what we're seeing and make better observations. So that is why I'm asking you to sketch. So let's take a look at our plant again. So I'm just going to go over, before I sketch, I'm just going to make some general observations. So here's some interesting things I'm noticing. First of all, the flowers at the top of the plant are dying and closing up, hopefully from pollination, but they're closing up sooner than the ones at the bottom, which is kind of surprising to me because I would have expected, since plants, grow vertically, so like lower down on the plant is going to be older, that would make me guess that these flowers down here are older than the ones up top, but these ones are dying sooner. So either I just don't really understand what's going on, which is probably the case because things are more complicated than humans can really understand, or maybe this thing is kind of growing in a different way than I expect it to. So that's kind of an interesting observation. I'm also noticing that we're getting the start of some axial buds here. So this is like old growth, but at the nodes we're starting to get some new growth coming out. You can see that really, really light color. Sorry, I'm doing my best, folks, here. Also that light color on the top. So we've got new growth coming in. And what I'm excited about is we have some root growth as well. So this is the same plant from its root. So red flowering currant is one of those plants that spreads rhizomatously, so from its root system. So we have both good top growth and growth from the root system. So I'm especially interested to see how that root growth changes over time. So I'm going to try to capture sort of those important things that I talked about in my sketch. The flowers being more dead near the top of the plant rather than the bottom, the new growth coming out of the axial buds, and the growth coming from the root system. So here comes my sketch. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and show you my leaf sketch. I like to sort of start small and work my way big. So I tried to draw it as accurate as I could. So you noted I noted that it was to scale. This was the size of the leaf I sketched. You might not be able to do that. So if you do sketch a leaf and it's a lot larger than you can fit on the page, make sure you're telling us that, because that's, good data. Like, how big are these leaves actually? So you could say leaf is like 2 times as big as this, leaf is 4 times shrunk, whatever kind of language works for you. I noted that it has a serrate margin. I did notice that the veins were very tidily, as you can kind of see if we can get the leaf here. I don't know if that's showing up on the picture, but the veins are very they're like directly across from each other. They're opposite veins, but they are cross-ventulate, which I didn't sort of put in there. They got lots of little veins crossing all over these main pathways. I also noticed it had a serrate margin, or really it's like a double serrate margin, and that the petiole, this piece here, was slightly hairy. I did note that as I'm looking at the plant, the smaller leaves have less pronounced lobes. So this clearly has 5 lobes, 5 clear lobes on this leaf, and the smaller leaves have more like 3. Because those bottom lobes sort of haven't developed yet. So that's kind of interesting. So there's my leaf sketch. Now I'm going to go ahead and sketch the whole plant. Okay, so I think that is all my observations here. So as you can see, I should have left myself a little more space. This is why I kind of recommend doing this not on the template, but on your own piece of paper. So I went over the leaf a little bit, but let's see if we can go over. There we go. So you can kind of see what I did here. A couple features I did highlight that the new axial buds coming in were a pale yellow. Sort of the things I found uncharacteristic or things that surprised me, that the flowers, which I just sort of did little squiggles for, that they were dying. So here's my little flower note. Flowers at the upper growth, they're pollinated or dying, still in full bloom at lower growth, which I just still find kind of strange. The terminal growth and all the new stuff is coming in pale yellow, which is also kind of surprising. I'm used to seeing new growth coming in a really healthy color, so I hope this doesn't mean that the plant is struggling in any way. Sometimes yellowy leaves mean a lack of nitrogen or other nutrients, but we'll just see. We'll see next week. And I did capture the root and rhizome growth. The other thing I want you to note is I tried to sort of capture the general height of things. I didn't like bring out a measuring tape or anything, but this plant at total is about 3.5 feet tall. The root growth is about 3 inches tall at this time, and it's really tightly packed together. I did some zoom-ins. So for each of these little branches coming off the main stem here, I noted that they're about like 6 inches long on the lower part of the plant, and each little stemlet has like 4 leaves coming off in almost a whorled leaf pattern, which is kind of interesting. So that's like these little poofs of leaves coming off in an alternating leaf pattern. So I should write down and capture, it's always great to capture the vocab terms, that on the stems and on the larger plant we have an alternating leaf pattern here, which is kind of cool. So yeah, here's my sketch. So now that we're down to the analysis questions here, these are meant to be sort of sentence starters. So there are 3 questions I'm asking you to answer. They are, I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. So what are the key things you're noticing that surprised you? So I identified 3. So what I'm going to write down is, I notice that So there's my 3 notices. I noticed that flowers higher on the plant are dying while lower ones are in bloom. I noticed that new growth is coming in at the axial buds in a pale yellow color. And I noticed that new growth is coming from the rhizomes. So these are observations that I'll come back to the following week especially and see how they changed. So I'm going to flip my page here and move on to I wonder. So my video had died, or my phone had died outside, so I finished my observation, so I thought I'd just show you what I came up with. Second one I wonder is really about asking questions. So what are the things you're noticing? What does that make you think about? What questions do you have? So I was wondering if the yellow color indicates a lack of nutrients. I'm wondering if the rhizome growth will bloom this year, so if that new growth coming out from the rootstock is going to actually produce flowers or whether that'll happen next year. And I'm wondering if the new growth will be taller than the main stem. So I don't really know this plant that well. I'm wondering if the new axial bud growth is going to be nice and short, more like a tree, or whether it's going to become more like a bush and overtake that main stem. So those were sort of my questions I'm hoping to answer through further observations. And finally, for 3, it reminds me of is an exercise in thinking sort of beyond our content. So what about your observation reminds you of things sort of like outside plant science world? So this could be a comparison, like this color reminds me of this thing. This could also be an analogy of some kind. So I kind of have both examples here. So I have the flowers actually reminded me from a distance of little tongues sticking out, which I know is kind of weird, but they kind of just look like little tongues sticking out from the plant from a couple feet away. So that was sort of what the plant reminded me of, this like giant stem with a bunch of tiny tongues. Kind of strange, but it works for me. It'll help me remember what that plant looks like. And finally, like the sort of analogy I had is those top flowers dying remind me of how sometimes you try to like sprint to the finish in something, but you get beaten by someone with a steadier pace. So like those lower flowers seem to be, they didn't come on as strong, but they're like around longer than the top flowers. So that was sort of my analogy. So I now have all my baseline data, my sketch and observations and comments, and my analysis questions. So that is a complete assignment, and you'll notice I've got sort of a rubric at the bottom of the assignment, and I'm just checking off that I did everything. For a 3, I'd want to see all items in the observation are present, and the sketch and description analysis are neat and legible. I think legible got caught up there. For a 4, you could do one or more of these. Analysis questions connect to content and vocabulary, level 2 or 3 questions, or the sketches and description is highly detailed. So I would say my sketch and description is highly detailed. A lot of like zoom-ins, a lot of magnification, a lot of comments. So I would say I meet a 4 on this assignment. For a 2 or a 1, you might just be missing a couple things. So for example, if you did a really good sketch and description, but maybe you were missing one of the analysis questions or didn't answer it very thoroughly, that's fine. You could still get a 2 and pass the assignment. So that is what I have for you. Hopefully that'll make this assignment easier. But I'm looking forward to seeing your observations, especially the ones about your home gardens.